GPU prices have been getting so much better, but some of them are still really stupid. For example, don't buy an RTX 3050. I'll tell you more as soon as I tell you about our sponsor, Skillshare. I'm really excited to tell you guys about today's sponsor, Skillshare. And the first 1,000 of you who click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial. Now, when I joined Skillshare, I was really excited to look up, how to do tech YouTube. I started this channel as a hobby, and I'm starting to see a lot of success, but how do the pros do it? Well, I found this series on YouTube Success by MKBHD, where he takes you through the entire process of how to make a successful YouTube video, and he's specifically focusing on tech videos. That's his niche. So this has been incredibly helpful for me. So if you see a lot of improvements in my titles, thumbnails, grabbing your attention from the beginning, using B-roll successfully, editing, a lot of that is stuff I'm learning here on Skillshare. And again, the first 1,000 of you who click the link in the description can get a 1-month free trial. Okay, here's why you should not buy an RTX 3050. So in this video, I'm going to be doing pricing as of the current moment, which is at pcpartpicker.com. Now, it's very important because I get people arguing about this in the comment section that in this video, I'm talking about new pricing, not used pricing. If you're interested in used, then that's a whole different discussion on pros and cons and all of that. Also in this video, I'm not going to be focusing on what is the best deal that you can find on a card like this if you wait around and hunt what's the lowest it's been available in the last few weeks. What I'm going to be doing is actually, if you went out and tried to buy it at a major retailer right now, what would they actually cost? And now, to do that, I'm going to be looking at PC Part Picker. I'm not sponsored by them or anything like that. They're just a convenient website that searches a wide variety of major retailers like Amazon, Newegg, Best Buy, B&H Photo. I think there's a few other ones that they do in there as well. And you can sort price high to low. Now, these aren't going to be as up-to-date as an instantaneous like stock drop bot or something like that, but they give you a good idea of what the current market looks like if you were buying today, right now. And the RTX 3050 still costs about $330 minimum for anything that's sitting in stock right now. And that is absolutely disgusting. So what I would highly recommend you buy instead of an RTX 3050 is an RX 6600 from AMD if you are considering 1080p gaming. And you might wonder, why am I not going below this? Well, if you go below this point, you're buying graphics cards that will already be struggling in current AAA 1080p games. And, if all you really play is some lightweight esports titles, that's fine. You could definitely go below this. But in this video, I'm going to be saying, okay, if you want to be playing the latest AAA game, you should be able to at least play it at high settings at 60 FPS. And the RX 6600, I have it, I've tested it out. I've tested it out against an RTX 3050. And in the incredibly demanding games that are also not particularly well optimized, like Cyberpunk, the RX 6600 can still deliver at high settings. And in most other games, you can actually crank it up to ultra settings, unless you want to push high refresh rates, in which case you could turn settings down a little bit. Now, this price right here, sometimes one thing you'll see on a PC Part Picker is a little misleading, because when you're looking at just this search list, sometimes it will include rebates as part of that. But if you actually click on the part, you can see that. Now, I'm just aware that a lot of the MSI cards, when they have a significantly lower price than everybody else, sometimes that is factoring in a mail-in rebate. Now, mail-in rebates usually do end up processing okay, but I always get questions, what's a rebate? So a rebate, you have to actually usually fill out a form, mail in your proof of purchase after you've bought it, and they eventually refund you the money. And sometimes that can take months. And I've heard some horror stories of it not ever processing, but I think a lot of times that's, after a month, people claim that it hasn't processed, but 2-3 months later, it actually does process, although I'm not going to say one never got lost in the mail. But it does mean that you need to have that money at the time of purchase and be very patient and diligent in following through on that process. However, promo codes that are applied instantly, I think, count. So even if you add $20 back onto that, that's still $275. And there's definitely ones available at the $300 price point as well that have better coolers and such. And the RX 6600 is going to be my recommended entry into solid 1080p 60 FPS gaming, and it's going to absolutely destroy that RTX 3050 unless you're trying to do ray tracing, but I don't recommend ray tracing at this price point. The GPUs just aren't strong enough for it to make a lot of sense. Also, if you're thinking DLSS versus, FSR upscaling technology, well, if at 1080p, I don't particularly like either technology, and so I would recommend trying to play the games at their native resolutions, in which case the 6600 is going to have a much easier time doing that than the RTX 3050. Now, if you have, if you have to go with Nvidia, and some people are like, you don't have to go with Nvidia, if you use your PC for something other than gaming, certain productivity apps are actually programmed more specifically to Nvidia hardware, and you have to buy new, then you might want to check out the RTX 2060. They do still sell these new, and the price and performance is actually much, much closer to what we're seeing on the RX 6600 from AMD. The main downside here being it only has 6 gigabytes of VRAM, which in this day and age I think is really low to be buying on a new GPU. Although for the most part at 1080p, you're still going to be okay, and you're getting to the point where you might be turning down a few settings anyway in the near future, which does also rein in some of the VRAM cost. Some people are like, there's a 12 gigabyte version of this 2060, just get that one. Well, that one, the cheapest one I'm seeing, costs $410, okay? So no, I'm not going to be recommending you buy that one, because if our price point jumps up that much, I'm going to be recommending a different GPU entirely. So for basic 1080p 60 FPS at higher ultra settings gaming, grab yourself an RX 6600, or if you have to have Nvidia, an RTX 2060. Avoid that RTX 3050. Even at its MSRP, which it's not available at, I still think the RX 6600 makes more sense. Just because the performance is just simply much, much better in gaming. Now, if you want to go up to entry-level 1440p, like, high to ultra settings around 60 FPS in the most demanding games, whereas, in lighter games, older games, or esports titles, crushing high refresh rate, we're going to need to step up to a higher-end GPU. Now, I don't think the RTX 3060 makes sense for 1440p compared to some of the other GPUs that we can get for a bit more. But you can if you're willing, especially to use DLSS and things like that. But I'd recommend for 1440p that we step up, if we're looking at the Nvidia side of things, I would like to recommend a 3060 Ti for entry-level 1440p gaming, but again, the problem is I'd like to recommend that if it was anywhere near its MSRP. These are still on the just normal market going for around $500, sometimes less, but still that's quite a bit. And now I will mention here that Best Buy drops. Best Buy is the place where in the United States you can get the Founders Edition cards for their MSRP. And I was recently able to get one pretty easily on a Best Buy drop for $400. And I've actually seen a lot of other people reporting that in the last couple of weeks, with the crypto market so far down and new GPUs coming out soon, the Best Buy drops have been a lot easier. So if you could grab an RTX 3060 Ti for $400 from Best Buy, I'd recommend that. However, if it's sitting at this $500 price point where you can find it, I would recommend looking at the 6700 XT from AMD, because you'll notice that this is significantly less money. So we're coming in significantly cheaper, and in my own personal testing, I've done head-to-head comparisons of the 6700 XT against the 3060 Ti. I would actually prefer the 6700 XT in most cases. Now, these are getting to the point where you might consider some ray tracing, although at 1440p, the ray tracing proposition on both cards isn't that great, although the 3060 Ti is certainly a lot better. So if you're not planning on ray tracing, getting the extra 4 gigabytes of VRAM combined with in more games than not, better performance as long as you're not ray tracing. I think this makes a lot of sense. One of the bigger drawbacks is not having DLSS support, although FSR 2.0 is good. It's close to the image quality and performance that you get from DLSS. However, it's not available in a wide range of games, and I do still see a little bit more image artifacting in motion on FSR 2.0 than I do with the current versions of DLSS. I know Kratos' beard in God of War stood out to me as a little bit sparkly and flickery compared to DLSS in my testing. Also, I will note that lots of games are having FSR 2.0 support modded into them, and this isn't certainly not as good as having a native implementation of it by the developer. A lot of games with DLSS support can just have the DLL file for DLSS redirected to assets from the FSR implementation that went open source, and so you can go through the trouble of modding that in, which is kind of interesting. But long story short, between the 6700 XT and the 3060 Ti, my main recommendation is buy whichever one is cheaper. And there you go. Now, if you want some higher refresh rate 1440p gameplay or just more solid ultra settings, things like that, not need to upscale quite as frequently, the RTX 3070 certainly is better than the 3060 Ti and the 6700 XT. But at the prices it's usually available, it's certainly not as good of price to performance. Its value is not as good, although it certainly is better as long as you don't run over that 8GB VRAM limit, although in my testing, that did not cause a lot of issues, even at maximum settings in most games. Most of the places where it was running over 8GB is when you're enabling max settings with ray tracing, but the ray tracing performance is already not great at 1440p, in my opinion. So anyway, just saying, between the 3060 Ti, 6700 XT, and 3070, I think the 6700 XT makes the most sense from a value perspective. Now, what if you want to go into higher refresh rate 1440p gaming? Well, we could look at the 3070 Ti. The 3070 Ti does give you a healthy performance boost, but notice that you're jumping now up to around $670. Of course, you can try the Best Buy drops and get one at $599. Now, the 6800 non-XT from AMD, sometimes actually, it's, non-XT, there we go, costs fairly similarly. When you start looking at this at a percentage dollar difference versus the lower end cards, these $30 to $40 swings when you get up into this price point maybe stop making as much sense, although keep in mind that the AMD card here does come with 16GB of VRAM. So as long as you're still not thinking about ray tracing or some of the productivity apps that require Nvidia, the 6800 is coming in cheaper without the 8GB of VRAM limitation that we're seeing on the 3070 Ti. So on this one, I'm just going to throw that up to a little bit of your personal preference between those. But in reality, for a really solid 1440p gaming experience, high refresh rates, maxing everything out except for maybe maxing out ray tracing, because even then the Nvidia GPUs are going to struggle, and the more demanding ray tracing titles, I'd actually recommend stepping up to an RTX 3080 if you want some future proofing here. Now, going past the 3080, I don't think makes a lot of sense. Now, on the 3080s, there's several versions of this. There's the 10GB, the 12GB, and the Ti. And the 12GB, when it's available at a similar price to the 10GB, is definitely the one you should get, although I think the one we're looking at here is relying on another one of those MSI, MSI mail-in rebates, yeah, so $30 mail-in rebate, and also the Ventus cooler model isn't the best. Now, my personal thoughts on coolers are, if the price difference between a much better cooler is only a few dollars, grab the better cooler. But if you could just buy a better graphics card or really can't afford the step up, for the same money, I wouldn't sweat it even if you get a low-end cooler. It doesn't make that much difference in your real-world experience. Your fan noises might be a bit louder, your temps might be a bit higher, but it's not the absolute end of the world. Anyway, the 12 gigabyte version actually performs better than the 10 gigabyte version by a few percent, in addition to having the extra VRAM, which will be really nice going into the future. And especially if you're looking at using this at 4K, although I'll talk about that in a bit. Now, the TI model is just kind of stupidly priced, in my opinion, versus the performance gain that you get compared to the baseline model. So I would not recommend, from a value perspective, stepping up to the TI model. And once you go up to a 3090, the value proposition is just completely gone, and the 3090 Ti is the exact opposite of value. So I recommend, for really high refresh rate, 1440p, excellent gaming experience, and being good for years to come, the 3080, especially the 12 gigabyte version, makes a lot of sense here. Now, AMD's competitor, the 6800 XT, does come in about $50 less. But here's the problem. The 3080 is the GPU where, in my opinion, at below 4K, so at 1440p, the 3080's ray tracing performance does actually make sense in a lot of games. So I think it starts to add a lot more value to something you might actually use, versus at the lower end, I feel like the ray tracing, to me, takes too big of a performance hit to be all that worthwhile, even on the Nvidia cards. But at this point, I would weigh ray tracing a bit more seriously here. The main advantage here for AMD is the extremely large VRAM capacity, but if you're getting the 12 gigabyte version of the 3080, I don't really see that being a problem anytime soon, and even the 10 gigabyte version at 1440p rather than at 4K, I think is okay, although I'd obviously, like I said, prefer that 12 gigabyte model. Also, again, the upscaling tech, if we do start talking about trying to use this at 4K, if we're trying to use this at 4K, the upscaling tech will be more necessary. I actually use a 3080 12 gigabyte as main 4K gaming GPU for the last few months, but for about 6 months I used the 6800 XT as my main 4K gaming GPU. So I have a lot of experience with both, and I do prefer the 3080 12 gigabyte. The main reason being DLSS in some games looks so good at 4K that the quality setting is very good for performance gain. And again, the upscaling tech from AMD with FSR 2.0, it's just not in as many games right now. So if they're costing about the same and you're getting the better ray tracing performance, better productivity, things like that, I think the Nvidia GPU at this point, okay, it's a $50 difference, but a $50 difference at this price point is a small percentage. And so for getting all of those extra features, I do think going the Nvidia route would be the way I would go personally, although I know some people just prefer the AMD side of things. You do want to save the extra $50. If you have absolutely no interest in ray tracing or certain productivity apps, yeah, you are saving a bit of money here and getting more VRAM. Going with the 6800 XT certainly isn't wrong. Although I would personally like to see a wider price gap between these two, given the features available at this price point. Now, at 4K, if I want to talk more specifically about that, this is where, if you already have a GPU you're pretty happy with right now, and you're thinking about jumping to 4K maybe in the future, waiting for the next gen of GPUs at the absolute high end might make more sense. Because I'll tell you, with my 3080 12 gigabyte, it does pretty well for 4K 60 FPS gaming, but I personally would like higher than 60 FPS, and to get there, I usually have to tweak some settings down or use DLSS a bit, and I definitely do prefer the native image to DLSS in almost every game actually, I prefer the native image just about every game I've tried it out in. So There could be something to be said for waiting for the next gen if you're looking at the high end. And I'll kind of end the video with this, although I just recently did a whole video on this topic, so I don't want to drag this on too long. Some people are saying don't buy any GPU right now because the next gen's coming out. Well, all the rumors point to the next gen launching initially with the highest end Halo products at extremely high price points, and I'd probably expect low availability and some scalping for the first few months anyway. So I wouldn't expect the more mid-range, reasonably priced products to be coming out until December or even going into January and beyond into 2023. And that's a long time to wait. There's something to be said for having a GPU now. So for example, the 3080, sure, you might be able to get something like this performance for closer to $500 or $600, you know, if you wait, you know, another 6 months or so. But, you know, we'll see. Now, the used market's a bit different. That might start to tank a lot quicker with crypto staying down and all of that, and people unloading crypto GPUs. So if you're willing to buy used, that's maybe a bit of a different story. But like I said, this video is focusing on the new market. I hope it was useful for you, and I hope you all have an excellent day.